The wind spoke in the timbers of Chateau Virlet that evening, whispering through the gaps with a voice like forgotten lullabies. The villagers said the house was cursed. Not for any haunting, exactly, but because no good ever stayed there for long. Joy would arrive at the gates like a visiting noble, only to vanish down the old woodland road before nightfall. And now, for the first time in 7 winters, someone had lit a candle in the east tower. The boy who saw it was named Matthew. He'd been gathering firewood in the thickets near the river when he noticed the light, a tiny flame in the high window, dancing like a lonely star. He dropped the kindling and ran back through the village shouting, "She's back! She's back!" No one needed to ask who. They knew Madame Elodie de Virlet had returned once. She had been the wife of Baron Allard, a man half again her age and twice her shadow. The match had been arranged, as most were. Elodie was known for her quiet beauty and her skill with the needle, crafting tapestries so fine the abbess at Caen had commissioned one for the convent hall. But in her husband's hall, her art was hidden behind trophies of war and hunting. No one saw what she made in the tower, no one except Allard, who boasted she wove saints and demons alike into her cloth. Then the fire came. It started in the west wing, spreading faster than any torch could have. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered of an argument, a shattered goblet, and a missing maid. The fire took half the chateau and all of the baron. Elodie was found days later, barefoot and bloodless, wandering the apple orchard humming to herself. She left the next morning in a cart, bound for Rouen, and hadn't returned since until now. Inside the east tower, Elodie watched the flame bend in her oil lamp. Her face was thinner now, the jaw sharper beneath pale skin, but her eyes had not changed. They were the same soft gray, like smoke on linen. She hadn't spoken aloud since arriving, hadn't summoned the steward or opened the chapel. But she had begun to work. She set up her loom in the old solar, brushing away years of dust. The threads she used shimmered faintly in candlelight dyed, not with madder or woad, but something stranger. Her fingers moved as though following a pattern no one else could see. And night after night, the image on the cloth grew. It began as a tree. No, not a tree, a thorn bush, dense and tangled, its boughs curling around a great black shape like ribs around a heart. Faces appeared in the leaves, some weeping, others snarling. At the center of the bush, a woman in a pale dress stood holding a lantern, her mouth stitched shut by red thread. By the 3rd day, the village priest came calling. Father Remy was not a man to meddle. He'd lived through 2 famines, 1 siege, and the abbey scandal of 72. But something about the light in that tower and the boy's breathless tale had turned his prayers toward darker verses. He climbed the winding path alone, cassock brushing, frost from the undergrowth, and knocked at the great iron-bound door. It creaked open on its own. "Madame?" he called gently. "Madame de Virlet?" No answer, but inside the hearth was warm. He stepped over the threshold. The scent of lavender hung in the air, so strong it choked him. The tapestries on the wall had changed. They once showed scenes from the passion and lives of the saints. Now they showed thorn bushes, wolves, a burning house, and a woman walking barefoot through snow. He turned a corner and found her in the solar. She sat before the loom, as silent as the grave, her hands moving like clockwork. "Madame," he said again, placing a hand on the table, "we feared you were lost." She did not look up. only continued her weaving dot the tapestry had grown. Now the woman in the cloth held not just a lantern, but a blade. The red threads at her mouth trailed outward, coiling through the thorns toward the faces in the branches. "Your work is vivid," he murmured, trying not to stare. "Might I ask, what is it meant to show?" She stopped, not her hands, but the air around her. The room felt suddenly thinner, as though she'd pulled the breath from it. Then she looked up. Her voice, when it came, was quiet and clear. "It is not meant to show. It is meant to remember." Father Remy felt the chill bloom in his spine. "Remember what, my lady?" She rose slowly and moved to the window. Outside, the orchard had turned to mist. "You'll see," she whispered, "when the last thread is placed." Back in the village, animals began to act strangely. Dogs barked. At empty corners, horses refused to go near the northern path. Children dreamed of shadows crawling across their ceilings. When asked, none could say exactly what frightened them, but they all spoke of the same sound, the whisper of thread pulled tight on a wooden frame. Matthew, the boy who had first seen the light, dared return to the road near the chateau. He carried a charm his grandmother had given him, an iron nail tied with a yellow ribbon, and crept near enough to see the window again. This time, there were 2 candles burning, and just as he turned to flee, he swore he saw the tapestry move. The garden behind the old convent had long been left to ruin. Thorned vines climbed the trellises like silent invaders. Statues of saints stood eroded and pitted, their eyes hollowed by years of wind and salt. It was a place where nothing bloomed. But memory, and even memory came wrapped in brambles. C. Lemons had not meant to find herself here. After the incident at court, after the coin with the emblem of St. Vincent rolled to her feet and the hooded stranger vanished into the crowd, she had returned to her chamber, heart pounding and thoughts fractured. She barely slept. By dawn, she was walking without purpose, carried only by the hunger for clarity. Her feet led her beyond the gates of Evero and into the convent of Sainte Marguerite, where, as a child, she'd once been taught her letters. Now she was a woman, and nothing about the world felt soft or innocent. The convent grounds were silent, save for the chirping of crows and the crunch of frost underfoot. A cloistered nun, old and bent like a half-folded page, admitted her with quiet recognition. "You're Marchand's girl," she said, voice lined with age. "I am no one's girl," Clemence replied, though she offered the woman a respectful nod. "I seek the garden." The nun said nothing more, only handed her a rusted iron key. "If you find what was buried, do not try to unearth it too fast. Roots remember pain." It was nonsense, surely, but somehow fitting. Now she stood at the edge of the ruined garden, key in hand, staring at the weather-beaten gate. Behind it, nettles and thorns moved in slow, windless motion, as if stirred by something beneath. She hesitated only a moment before pushing the gate open. It shrieked as though waking from a long sleep. Inside, the garden was alive in a way no untouched land should be. A faint mist hovered just above the ground, curling like fingers over the broken stones. The statues watched her. A fallen sundial lay cracked in half, its gnomon pointing not at the sky, but at a patch of earth from which the thorns grew thickest. She approached, kneeling, and ran her fingers along the cold bronze of the gnomon. There, hidden beneath layers of grime and vine, she found a small sigil carved into the stone. A rose encircled by flames, the emblem of House Foray. Her mother's house, C. Lemons, sat back on her heels, breath catching in her throat. This was no accident. The garden, the statue's gaze, the sundial pointing like a compass, all of it spoke in a language older than words. She closed her eyes. Memory came. A garden, once full of lily and basil. Her mother, humming a song whose lyrics changed each time she sang it. A low stone bench, a silver mirror held between them. The reflection not quite matching reality. Her mother's voice, soft and trembling. If ever they come for you, look to the garden. The truth grows in the thorns. Clemence's hands trembled. The garden had been her mother's sanctuary before she was forced to marry. Emile Marchand, before her fire was buried under layers of velvet in silence. What had she meant by truth in thorns? Clemence reached into the center of the patch and began pulling back the vines. They resisted, drawing blood from her wrists and fingers, but she did not stop. Finally, beneath the coils of nature's armor, her fingers struck something solid. A box, rough hewn, wood with metal corners. She pulled it free and sat back, panting. It was locked, of course. She lifted the rusted key given to her by the nun, and with a satisfying click, the box opened. Inside lay a velvet pouch, a single sheet of vellum, and a pendant shaped like a CUNBURST. She reached first for the letter. The ink had faded, but the hand was unmistakably her mother's. My dearest Clemence, if you read this, I am gone, or worse, I am pretending to be someone I am not. This pendant belonged to my mother, and her mother before her. It is not merely an heirloom, but a symbol of an oath older than the crown itself. The House of Foray guarded something precious, and when it was stolen, it shattered more than bloodlines. It cursed them. You must understand, your father did not know. I kept it from him, for your sake, for your safety. But now, safety is a luxury we cannot afford. Go to the vineyard at Croissable. Speak to the man who calls himself the Lantern. Show him the pendant. He will know what to do. Clemence, you are stronger than I ever was. Trust the fire in you. It burns clean. The garden grew colder. Croissable. The name rang in her ears like a bell tolling for the dead. It was a forgotten stretch of land north of the river, once rumored to be cursed. She'd heard stories whispered by kitchen maids in cellar. Boys, they said people vanished there, that shadows danced without cause, that the land was dead, but the bones beneath it were not. And now her mother sent her there with a sun-shaped pendant and a letter full of ghosts. She tucked the box beneath her cloak and left the garden, leaving the thorn vines to resume their slumber. The convent's bell tolled once as she crossed back into the world, echoing through the frozen air like a warning. By dusk, she had returned to Evero. Her cloak was torn, and her hands were raw. She told no one of the garden or what she had found. That night, a quiet knock came at her door. It was Lucien. He looked pale, shaken. Clemence, someone was asking for you at the market. They showed a portrait, a recent one. Her blood ran cold. Who? I don't know. A man in a dark hat, speaking in a southern dialect. He had an emblem stitched onto his sleeve, crossed. Swords under a sunburst. The same emblem. C. Lemons closed her eyes for a long moment, then turned to her writing desk. She wrote a single line on a torn scrap of parchment and handed it to Lucien. I need you to find a coachman, one who doesn't ask questions. He read the note. Croissable? That place is, I know, but I have to go. Lucien hesitated, then nodded. I'll see it done. Leave before sunrise. The fewer eyes, the better. The road to Croissable was as rough as legend described Dot by noon the following day. Clemence sat in a rickety carriage, the landscape around her giving way to gnarled trees and crooked fences. Fog gathered like breath from a sleeping beast. Birds did not sing here. Even the wind moved differently, low and circular, whispering secrets too old to decipher. She clutched the pendant in one hand, the letter folded and hidden in her bodice. Each jolt of the carriage jarred her spine and her resolve. Finally, the driver pulled to a halt at a crooked signpost half buried in weeds. This is as far as I go, he said, eyes never meeting hers. Beyond that, it's not my place. Clemence stepped out, boots sinking into damp earth. Where can I find the lantern? The driver hesitated. They say he lives in the stone chapel, west of the vineyard, but I've never seen him. Be careful, mademoiselle. She nodded and turned toward the vineyard path, the earth crunching beneath her. The air smelled of rot and sweet wine. The vineyard was in ruins. Blackened vines clung to dead trellises. A single crow cawed from a splintered post. And there, in the distance, half shrouded in mist, stood the chapel. Dot. It looked more like a mausoleum square, heavy and silent. She approached. Slowly. The door was opened. Inside. Candles burned low on every surface. The air smelled of myrrh and damp stone. At the center of the chapel, seated in a circle of salt and inked symbols, was a man in gray robes. He looked up, and his eyes reflected the candlelight like polished metal. You carry the sun, he said, voice low and dry. Cle acute, menc. He stepped forward and unfastened the pendant, holding it out. My mother said you would know. The man took it gently, then motioned to the space before him. Sit, daughter of fire. The tapestry awaits its next thread. She did not know what that meant. But she sat. And the door to the chapel closed on its own. The road to Liren Abbey was narrower than Leonore remembered, choked by brambles and the indifferent crawl of nature reclaiming its own. Ferns spilled over from the woods, and ivy gripped the crumbling walls of the outer way stations. The carriage could go no farther than the foot of the hill, and so Leonore dismounted, lifting her hem just enough to keep it from the wet underbrush. Rain had fallen overnight. Now the earth steamed, warm and damp beneath the morning sun, casting a veil of mist across the stone path that once bore pilgrims from every corner of the kingdom. Once the faithful came seeking miracles. Now few came at all. At the crest stood the abbey, stark and ancient, its bell tower collapsed, its bells long since scavenged or buried under the rubble. The sisters Leonore suspected were fewer now. Perhaps none remained. Yet a thin trail of smoke coiled from one of the chimneys. Life still stirred within. She passed beneath the pointed arch of the gate, where vines had clawed through the iron. Filigree. Her boots clicked against wet stone as she crossed the cloister. A row of statues, saints and martyrs alike, stared down in eroded silence. One had lost her face to time. Another, her hands. As Leonore approached the main door. It creaked, open before she could knock. A figure in faded gray robes emerged, tall, spare, and unmistakable. Sister Aveline. Leonore breathed. The nun's face was weathered, the lines of devotion etched deep into her cheeks, but her eyes retained that same clarity Leonore had. "Remembered from childhood. You have your mother's eyes," the sister said, "but the walk of your father. I didn't think you would remember me. I remember all the lambs who passed through these walls, even those who lost their way." Leonore dipped her head. "Then perhaps I've come back to find it." Aveline stepped aside, beckoning her inward. "Then you must begin in silence. Come." The halls of the abbey were cool and dim. Dust clung to the windows where stained glass once bloomed with color. Now only muted light passed through. Paintings had faded, tapestries frayed. But the quiet remained sacred. They walked in wordless procession until they reached the scriptorium. Its shelves were bare, most of its manuscripts confiscated during the last war or sent to the royal libraries for safekeeping. Yet a few volumes remained, cloaked in dust and reverence. Sister Aveline drew back a wooden screen behind the desk. Within it was a staircase, stone, narrow, and descending into shadow. "You remember the crypt?" she asked. "I remember the cold," Leonore replied. "The dead do not speak, but the stones remember them. And the stones speak if you listen." She handed Leonore a beeswax candle and struck a flint to light it. "The answers you seek will not be written in the air above. You must go below." Leonore nodded, holding the candle aloft as she descended. Crypt smelled of moss and rust, of candle smoke and forgotten bones. Her footsteps echoed in the hush, stirring no other sound. Here the air was thick, wrapped around her like a veil. Her candle cast dancing shadows against the low arched ceiling, illuminating alcoves where nameless monks and benefactors lay. At the center stood a stone slab and unmarked tomb, newer than the rest. Its edges were chiseled clean. The dust upon it had not yet settled entirely. She circled the tomb. Something called to her an echo, a whisper not quite heard. The flame in her hand flickered as if stirred by unseen breath. A loose stone jutted from the floor behind the tomb. With effort, she pried it loose, revealing a shallow hollow. Within it lay a bundle oilcloth wrapped, sealed with old wax bearing no insignia. She drew it out and peeled it open. Parchments, half rotted, the ink smudged with time and damp, yet some words remained legible. "In the 3rd year of the Fox King's reign, witnessed the birth of a child whose eyes bore the mark, double quotes, sworn to protect the line until it returns to the light, The script was not monastic. It was personal, hurried, as if written in fear. Leonore scanned the pages, her mind stitching together a patchwork of secrets. These were not records meant for the royal annals. These were confessions, warnings. She tucked the parchment beneath her cloak. Back in the candlelit warmth of the abbey's refectory, Sister Aveline stirred a pot of nettle soup. Her hands moved slowly, but her mind was sharp. "You found the tomb," she said, not looking up. Leonore sat across from her. "Who was buried there?" "No one who ever bore a crown," Aveline replied, "but someone who could have, someone who might yet." "You speak in riddles." "No, I speak as plainly as I dare. You come with your father's cloak around your shoulders, but you do not know what it conceals. My father was a courtier. He was a loyal man, loyal to more than one truth." Leonore folded her arms. "Tell me what you mean." Sister Aveline turned the ladle once more, then set it aside. Her voice dropped to a hush. There was a child born in Evero many years ago, beneath an eclipse. Not to royalty, but to one of their shadows. A child marked by blood legitimate. If inconvenient, the king at the time had many shadows. Leonore felt a chill crawl up her spine. And what became of the child? Hidden, guarded, and eventually buried, or so the world believes. Their eyes met across the steam of the soup. You think I am that child? I think, said Aveline gently, that the truth frightens even those who seek it. Outside, the mist had begun to lift. Sunlight filtered through the broken tower, and birds called from the woods beyond. Leonore sat alone in the ruined garden, the hidden pages in her lap. Names blurred across the ink nobles who had conspired to hide a birth, knights who had sworn vows outside the bounds of heraldry. There were symbols she did not recognize, sigils scratched in haste. But one name appeared again and again. Antonin de Virels, not as a conspirator, but as a witness. He had known. Perhaps always. The ache returned behind her eyes, heavier now with knowing. A footfall stirred the gravel behind her. She turned. A figure stood at the edge of the archway, his silhouette unmistakable. Not a ghost. Not a dream. Antonin, she said. He looked older than when last she'd seen him, though only a year had passed. His face was leaner, the shadows beneath his eyes deeper. But his presence commanding, quiet and steady, had not changed. You came, she said. I received your letter. I didn't sign it. You didn't need to. They stood facing each other in the pale garden light. Neither moved. There is a fire beneath the crown, Leonore said. And someone is feeding it. Antonin nodded. I've seen it spreading. The court is restless, whispers louder than words, and too many familiar faces turning away when called upon. Leonore lifted the parchment bundle. This is what remains. It names those who knew of the child, of the claim. And what does it mean for you? I don't know yet. Antonin stepped closer. You suspect yourself. I suspect nothing. I only feel hunted. You are. They would not let the truth reach the court. Then why let me live? Because they do not yet know how much you know. Leonore's grip tightened on the papers. Then I must make them afraid of what I might say. Antonin's brow furrowed. And risk your life? She looked away. I never had a claim to safety, only silence, and I'm tired of that. They stood in the garden until the shadows lengthened and the wind turned cool. Birds sang their final songs of the day, and the bells, those that remained, rang the call to vespers. Antonin finally spoke. We must return to Evero. If these names are real, and the conspiracy alive, then you will not be safe here. Leonore nodded. Then I ride tonight, and I with you. A flicker of something warm stirred behind her ribs. I'm not the girl you left in the winter, she said, and I'm not the man who walked away. They turned, leading behind the quiet of the abbey for the long road back to the storm. The return to Evero was cloaked in twilight. Leonore and Antonin traveled without heralds or guards, choosing a narrow woodland route that wound like a ribbon of dark silk through the underbrush. They spoke little, saving their words for the walls that could not listen. The capital rose ahead, layered in haze, its spires etched against the evening like black thorns against a dusky sky. Once, Leonore had thought it beautiful, a city of lanterns, music, and the murmur of courtly laughter. Now she saw its true shape, a nest of schemes where power fed upon silence, and names whispered too often were erased from memory. They dismounted just before the east gate, where Antonin's connections could slip them through without fanfare. His influence lingered like perfume, quiet, invisible, and entirely necessary. I never asked what became of you after the crown changed hands, Leonore murmured as they passed into a narrow alley behind the perfumer's quarter. I served, as I was told, Antonin said simply, but not always as I was expected. She glanced at him. You remained in the king's confidence. I remained near it. But one doesn't warm oneself by a fire without learning how it burns. They reached a small door, carved into a forgotten chapel wall. Antonin knocked twice, waited, then twice again. The door opened. A short man with a crooked nose and a limp ushered them inside without a word. He locked the door behind them. Welcome back, my lord, he said to Antonin. It's been some time. Antonin inclined his head. We'll need ink, fire, and silence. All three we've got. The man shuffled off, leaving them in a cloister cell, stripped of all but a table and 2 stools. A candle already burned in the corner. Leonore laid the parchment bundle on the table. Some of the ink is gone. Others are only half-names. But enough remains. Antonin reached for one of the sheets, his eyes narrowing as he read. These are men still living. And dangerous? Dangerous enough to end a dynasty if truth breathes too close. Leonore said. Then we breathed louder. Hours passed. They copied what could be copied, transcribed what remained legible, and committed fragments to memory. Names, places, codes in the margins. Among the scattered lines, a single note returned again and again. The pale book. What is it? Leonore asked, pointing to it. Antonin exhaled. A ledger. Of blood, not coin. Said to be kept by the archivist of the inner tower, who answers to no monarch, only to the shadows behind them. It's real? I believe. It is. And if it contains the full account of the lineage that was hidden, it's the only proof strong enough to shake the court. Then we find it. He looked at her. It will be guarded. Not with swords, but with loyalty sharpened by fear. I've been afraid before, Leonore said, and it never saved me. By dawn, Antonin left to send quiet word through. His old network. Leonore remained behind, her head on her folded arms, the candle down to its last inch. Sleep had not touched her, but thoughts had come and gone in uneasy procession. When the chapel bell rang for matins, she rose. Not as a penitent, but as a woman carrying a flame others had tried to extinguish. She opened the hidden door that led to the chapel's main hall, and paused. A figure stood there, cloaked in fur-trimmed black, hood drawn low. Lady Leonore. The woman said. Her voice was slow honey, elegant and dangerous. Do I know you? Leonore asked. Not yet, but your mother did. I was once her confidant. The woman removed her hood. Silver hair flowed over her shoulders. Her eyes were amber and unblinking. I am Dame Lysander, and you are standing at the edge of a very steep place. Leonore stepped forward. Then perhaps you've come to push me. Lysander smiled. No, child. I've come to see which way you fall. They walked together through the sunlit chapel. Dust rose in the shafts of light. You believe you're chasing truth, Lysander said. But truth, like fire, must be shaped, or it consumes. Then let it burn, Leonore replied. Lysandre's smile faltered. Your father once said the same, and he died before he could see the ashes. Leonore's hand tightened into a fist. Then you knew what he protected. I knew what he feared, and what he loved. They stopped before a fresco-faded saints ringed by golden halos. Lysander placed a hand on the wall. You carry the blood of kings, but blood is not enough. You must know how to survive it. Leonore turned to face her. Then teach me. By the time Antonin returned, Lysander had vanished. She left no message? He asked. She left warnings. Antonin studied Leonore's face. And you trust her? No, but I understand her. He held out a scroll. The pale book exists. It's kept beneath the inner tower, behind two gates. One of silver, one of silence. And how do we pass them? Carefully. 2 nights later, under a new moon, they approached the eastern wing of the palace, an older, less used quarter long abandoned by courtiers, seeking light and luxury. Dressed in plain garb, they moved like shadows. Antonin's contact, a scribe, with a grudge, had arranged for the guard rotation to shift just long enough for them to slip through. They reached the narrow stair behind the archives. A locked gate of filigree silver blocked their path. Antonin produced a key of bone. An old relic, he said, given by an old friend. The gate creaked open. Below lay a corridor of ancient stone, lit by torches that burned without smoke. Silence pressed in from every side. They reached a second door plane, wooden without handle. Here begins the gate of silence, Antonin whispered. He turned to Leonore. Once we cross, we cannot speak, not until we return. Not even a whisper. She nodded. They pressed the door. It opened into darkness. Inside. The air was heavy with dust and forgotten ink. Scrolls and tomes lined endless shelves. The flame in. Their lantern barely touched the black. They moved together, side by side, eyes sweeping for any sign. Then Leonore saw it, a single pedestal, untouched by dust. Upon it, a book bound in white leather, its edges pale as old bone. The pale book. She reached out, and a hand stopped her. Antonin pointed. A thin wire looped around the pedestal's base, almost invisible. A trap. Leonore pulled a pin from her sleeve, her fingers deft from years of embroidery and hidden knives. She slid the wire from its notch and let it drop gently to the floor. Antonin stepped back. She lifted the book. It was colder than she expected. They left the way they came. Back in the safety of the chapel, the candlelight caught the pale cover. Like frost, Leonore opened it. Names. So many names. Illegitimate children, hidden marriages. Deaths unrecorded. And one entry dated 17 years ago. Leonore de Vaux. Born under eclipse. Father, Edouard de Caen. Mother, Lady Aurélie, chambermaid to the Queen Consort. Sworn into silence by decree. Protected by royal retainer. Name redacted. Future unknown. Leonore stared at it. All this time, her name had been written in ink. No one would speak. Antonin's hand closed gently over hers. You are the claim. I was the secret, she said. Now I must choose what that means. Before the next sun rose, the court would learn, not from her lips, but from the whispers that trailed behind them like smoke. The pale book would be seen. Names would shake, loose from silence. But Leonore knew this was only the beginning. The thorns had awakened Dot, and the tapestry was not yet done. The whispers began before the bells. A laundress glimpsed a parchment slipped beneath the noble's door. A page boy overheard the captain of the guard curse the name Can in the armory. By mid-morning, the queen's favorite falconer had, and in the aviary, leaving his birds unhooded in their roosts. The pale book had not yet touched the throne, but its shadow had. Leonore watched the unraveling from the upper galleries of the chapel. A monk's habit draped her frame, borrowed from a brother too blind to question her height. From behind the latticework, she saw nobles stumble into confession. Court advisors rushed down corridors, and the king's scribe burned 4 sealed letters. Before noon Dot, each flick of flame sent her heart tighter into her chest. Antonin entered without fanfare, as always. His boots were still damp from the dew. He'd been out at dawn. "It's begun," he said softly. "I saw. They've summoned the Inquisitor." Leonore turned. "The Red Bishop?" "He hasn't worn red in years," Antonin murmured. "But yes. Bishop Marcellin has been given leave to investigate the disturbance of dynastic stability." She drew a slow breath. "He'll come for me." "Not yet. Not until he's sure." Leonore touched the hem of her sleeve. "Then, let's give him reason to be." They moved swiftly, while Antonin fed discontent through the city letters placed in the hands of exiled courtiers. Secrets whispered to guards once loyal to her father. Leonore entered the court's gardens under a different name, the Queen's. Ladies, in their pastel finery, were picking lavender and reciting dull poetry when Sister Julienne arrived. She bowed low. "The bishop sends his blessings," she said, "and requests the favor of a floral offering be prepared before his audience tomorrow." The ladies, eager to serve a man whose very title could unmake marriages, hastily complied. One sweet Lady Blanche led Leonore to the back gardens, where the roses tangled like red stars against the trellises. Here, beneath a marble angel with its face worn smooth by rain, Leonore planted a letter, Dot or no name. Only a crest half sun, half eclipse Dot. She left it hidden under a folded apron, precisely where the Queen's maid would look when she sought her comb later that evening. That night, the letter reached Queen Isabel's hands. She read it 3 times. Her maid reported she did not weep, but neither did she sleep. At dawn, Bishop Marcellin arrived. He came in a simple carriage pulled by gray horses, without sigils or entourage. His robes were black. His cross was of iron, unpolished. Court parted for him as though he were illness incarnate. Antonin watched from the roof of the old stables. 10 guards, he murmured. Not in uniform, loyal to the privy doctrine, not the crown. Leonore stood beside him. "How long until he calls for me?" Antonin met her gaze. "He already has." She was summoned to the bishop's solar, a stone chamber beneath the east tower, lit only by narrow slits in the wall. Bishop Marcellin sat at a long table. No inkpots, no parchments, just a single candle burning low. He was older than she remembered, tall and hollow, with hands too long for his sleeves. "Lady Leonore," he said without greeting. "Your Excellency. Do you know why you're here?" She raised her chin. "Because truth breathes louder than lies." A flicker in his brow. "And yet you breathe still. You haven't tried to silence me." "Not yet." He gestured to the candle. "This flame burns in the Tower of Doctrine. When it goes out, so does the memory of those found false. I am not false." "Perhaps." But the king fears memory more than murder. Leonor stepped forward. And you, Bishop? What do you fear? His voice was cold. The unraveling of the divine pattern. She leaned closer. Then you should have bound your tapestry better. She was not arrested. Not then, but her chambers were watched. Her meals tasted before they reached her. Her letters vanished between ink and delivery. The court held its breath in the great hall. The nobles debated the harvest, the trade routes, the weather, but no one spoke of the name now rising behind their teeth. Eliacute Onord. The next move came not from the bishop, nor from Antonin, but from Queen Isabel herself. She summoned Leonor to the private greenhouse. It was a place of legend, kept warm through clever alchemy, lit with violet glass that coaxed rare orchids into bloom. Leonor arrived in a borrowed gown. Her hair, usually braided for travel, fell loose across her shoulders. Isabel stood by a fountain carved like a lioness, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "Do you remember me?" she asked. "I remember you held my hand when I scraped my knee," Leonor replied. "I remember your scream." The queen reached into her sleeve and pulled forth a locket. "I kept this," she said, "because it was yours. Your mother gave it to you the day she died." Leonor's breath caught. Inside was a faded sketch. A woman with high cheekbones and storm-gray eyes. "Aurelie, she died protecting you," the queen said. "And I?" Her voice broke. "I let them bury her name." "You saved me," Leonor whispered. "I hid you," Isabel said, "like a thorn in silk. And now you bloom." Tears slipped silently down her cheek. "The king will not yield," she added. "But if I speak, others might." Leonor reached for her hand. "We don't need his crown," she said. "Only their ears." The queen sent word through veiled letters and hollow rings. Old allies stirred. A duke in the north publicly questioned the royal succession. A marquis recalled forgotten edict. A poet sang of an eclipsed rose returning to bloom and in the Tower of Doctrine. Bishop Marcellin struck Leonor's name from his registry. She was no longer heretic. She was threat. 3 nights later, the assassins came. They entered through the apothecary's window. Silent as frost, cloaked in white, one carried a blade shaped like a feather. The other bore a vial, marked with a serpent. They reached her bed, and found it empty. A trap. Leonor watched from behind the arras. Antonin, masked, struck first. The man with the feather blade dropped before he could cry out. The other tried to run. Leonor stepped into his path. "I know your master," she said. "Tell him I do not sleep." She let him flee. The next morning, Bishop Marcellin's coach left Evero. No destination declared. He never returned with the bishop gone. The court cracked. One by one, nobles emerged from silence. The Countess of Brock admitted she had witnessed the queen's chambermaid escorted. Under guard the night Leonor was born, the keeper of records produced a sealed document, hidden 20 years, bearing the king's reluctant signature, acknowledging the child of a U.R. acute lie. And at last, from the vaults of the inner tower, the pale book was laid upon the floor of the grand hall. The king did not appear, but the crown's silence was enough. They crowned her not with gold, but with ivy, a symbol of endurance, of what clings and climbs and survives. The throne remained the king's. She did not take it, but she took its shadow, and with it, Its power dot in the weeks that followed, Leonore reshaped the court. She reopened the Scholars' Hall, pardoned the exiled truth speakers, and declared a year of remission for the poor. She did not rule as monarch. She ruled as memory. Antonin became her advisor in daylight, her protector by moon. Queen Isabel, quiet now, watched from the garden, where she planted white roses in rows shaped like eclipses. And beneath it all, the city breathed differently as us. If truth itself had taken root one evening, Leonore sat by the old fountain. The stars shimmered above like frost upon glass. Antonin approached, holding a scroll. "From Lysander," he said. Leonore opened it. Only 6 words. "The tapestry is only half woven." She smiled. "Then let's weave the rest." The city no longer whispered. It sang in taverns and courtyards. Leonore's name was painted on clay cups and sewn into children's ribbons. A merchant baked her profile into gingerbread, and a blacksmith from the Iron Quarter forged ivy crowns for those bold enough to wear them. But the throne remained untouched. King Theodore had not left his wing of the palace since. The pale book was unsealed. He neither confirmed nor condemned Leonore's place. A silence too stubborn to be cowardice, and too cold to be forgiveness. Some claimed he had gone mad. Others said he simply waited for the world to forget her again. Leonore did not wait. Spent her mornings in the old scriptorium, poring over scrolls once considered too dangerous to read aloud. She met with cartographers, astronomers, and messengers from far-off provinces. At dusk she visited the orphan houses, speaking not as heir but as daughter of a silenced line. Still, even in triumph, the crown of ivy scratched her scalp. Antonin noticed. He always did. "Something weighs on you," he said one night, as they stood atop the eastern bastion, watching a storm pass beyond the mountains. "I have won the memory of a name," Leonore replied, "but not the place that name was meant to hold. You have the city, and yet I still write in shadows." Antonin studied her face, then come out into the light. He brought her news the next morning. The court of forgotten names still lives. Leonore turned sharply. "I thought it was myth." "It was," he said, "until now." The court of forgotten names had once been a gathering of exiles, princes disinherited, daughters cloistered, widows whose estates had vanished into the royal purse. They were said to meet once each season in a hidden abbey, protected by snow and silence. Now, it seemed, they had resurfaced. Antonin unfurled a map. North of St. Flavian, past the drowned forest. They gather near the ruins of Calbrock Abbey. Leonore touched the page. "What do they want?" He looked at her. "A queen who remembers them." They traveled in secret. Only Queen Isabel knew where Leonore had gone, and she told no one not. Even the king. Leonore rode a mare called Seven, gifted by the stable hands in quiet rebellion. Antonin rode beside her, his coat marked with no crest. The journey took 4 days, through thunder-wet roads, fields where the wheat had not yet risen, and villages where every door bore ivy scratched into the wood. On the 5th night, they reached Cael Brock. Was not ruins. Not entirely. The abbey stood atop a hill shrouded in fog. Its bell tower long collapsed, its stained glass shattered into the grass like bright feathers, and yet firelight flickered within. Lanterns strung between dead trees. Music not courtly, but warm rose into the night. A woman in a weathered green cloak greeted them at the outer gate. "Do you bear memory?" she asked. Leonore nodded. "Then enter." Inside, the abbey had become a sanctuary for the unmade. There were no titles here, no bows or rings, only stories. A blind harpist who had once sung for a duke played in the alcove. A gray-haired woman sat by a hearth, carving a royal seal into kindling. A boy no older than 10 recited poetry written by his mother. A former scribe turned fugitive, and they all knew her. Leonore, child of Aureli, ivy air, star that did not burn out. They gathered that night in the chapel. The floor was covered in petals, wilted, fresh, painted, stolen. Each one carried a name once stripped from the scrolls of power. Leonore stepped into the circle and spoke. "You were buried," she said, "not with soil, but with silence." Eyes glistened around her. "I cannot give back what was taken, but I can speak it and make others remember." A murmur, then a song, old, half forgotten. A melody that had once been banned in the royal court. When it ended, a man stepped forward. He wore no shoes, and his cloak wore the faded emblem of house. Galliard, a house extinguished when Leonore was still a babe. "You speak with promise," he said. "But do you act with purpose?" Leonore did not hesitate. "Tell me what you would have me do." And so began the reckoning dot in the months that followed. Leonore wove a tapestry, not of thread, but of restitution dot with the help of the court. Of forgotten names, she unearthed decrees hidden for decades. Dowries denied, land charters falsified, heirs erased by ink and blade. She convened a council of restoration, a circle of witnesses, who could confirm what the court had tried to forget. In the palace, scrolls once redacted were restored. Estates were returned to descendants. Titles were amended, and in some cases, dissolved when they no longer matched the truth they pretended to hold. The city, long numb to injustice, began to stir again. Not with rebellion, but with repair. But not all welcomed the return of memory. In the south, Lord Devereux barricaded his keep, refusing to yield land that had once belonged to the silenced House Merlin. In the east, several minor houses broke allegiance, citing desecration of noble order. And within the palace itself, murmurs thickened. Some said Leonore was rewriting history, that she sought not truth, but vengeance. Even Queen Isabel grew nervous. "They will fear you," she warned one evening, "if you go too far." Leonore looked at her across the courtyard, where the ivy had overgrown the statues of past kings. "Then let them fear a woman who remembers." It was during the summer convocation that the matter came to a head. Traditionally, the king would open the session with a decree. But Thudor, silent for so long, sent only a sealed missive, its contents never revealed. Leonore stood in his place, before nobles, clerics, tradesmen, and farmers. She read a proclamation of restoration. A public archive of all names stripped from the royal annals since the year of ashes. Each name was read aloud, one by one. It took 3 hours. And when the last was spoken, silence fell, not stunned, but sacred. Then, from the back, a voice called, "Let her wear the crown," followed by another. And another, until the entire hall rang with it. "Let her wear the crown." That night, Leonore returned to her chambers and found a letter waiting. It bore no seal. Only a single pressed rose within. And one line, written in a hand she had not seen since childhood. "You do not need a crown to rule, but you may choose to. Signed only. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the pale book, beside her mother's last entry. The next morning, she stood in the hall of glass. The king's throne stood at the end, empty. She walked its length slowly, ivy crown in hand, and set it down not on the throne, but on the pedestal beside it, a place for memory. For those the kingdom had forgotten, the city watched as she stepped out onto the balcony, no crown upon her brow, no scepter in hand, only a simple braid, an old ring on her finger, and the truth behind her eyes. She raised one hand, and the bells of Evero began to ring, not in mourning, but in return. The kingdom had not seen a summer like this in 2 generations. Letters flew like swallows across the sky's invites, restitutions, pardons, reforms. The ink pots of Evero ran dry twice in 1 month. A printer in St. Armand collapsed from overwork and wept when Leonore sent her a new press, carved with the emblem of the ivy crown. No wars were declared, no battles fought, but make no mistake, this was revolution. Just not the kind the old guard understood. They called it the Thorned Concord, a treaty not between foreign kingdoms, but between memory and power. In the council hall, Leonore presided without title. She refused the word Queen Regent and did not press for coronation. But each time the nobles met, they waited for her to speak before they voiced a thought. When she stood, they quieted. When she raised a brow, they reconsidered. Antonin joked, "You rule like rain, not thunder." But thunder was coming. It arrived in the form of a scroll, bound in black ribbon. The seal, the sword and stag of House de Rouses, Lord Mathis. De Rouses was a name that curled like smoke, neither fully present nor fully absent. He had held no seat at court in 15 years, preferring to run his domain like a miniature kingdom. He paid his taxes in copper and insults. He answered summons with riddles or not at all. And yet his name still lingered in council conversations. Like a knife left on a table, the scroll he sent to Leonore was brief. The crown does not grow from roots. It is taken. I invite you to try. Antonin read it twice, then threw it into the hearth. Leonore did not react. Send word, she said. Tell Lord de Rouses that we accept the invitation. The journey to the Highlands took 7 days. Not because of distance, but because every village they passed begged for her to stop. In Laken, the town square had been renamed Place d'Aulay. In Roussel's, a schoolhouse flew a green banner where the old royal sigil had been got in Tremont. The mayor wept at her feet and offered the town's registry of missing persons, kept for 30 years and never once opened by a magistrate. I will make these names known, Leonore promised, voice steady. Antonin watched her as they left, his expression unreadable. You're building a new kingdom, he said at last. She looked at him. Double quotes. No, I'm just unburying the old one. They arrived at Castle Hardivan at dusk. The keep stood atop a cliff, like a relic from a crueler century. Gray, angular, wrapped in bramble. The drawbridge was down, but no torches lit the gates. They were expected. As they crossed the bridge, a whisper echoed in the mist. Enter, daughter of ghosts. Leonore did not flinch. Lord de Rouses greeted them in the central hall. He looked, as Leonore remembered from childhood, tapestries tall, spare, with a mouth like a scar and eyes the color of boiled steel. He did not bow. You bring an entourage. I bring memory, she said. He chuckled. I had not realized memory required so many boots. Behind her stood a delegation. Antonin, 2 chroniclers, a herald, and a woman named Iseult Merlin, the last of her line, dispossessed by Derosus. During the year of the pale fire, the Lord's eyes flicked to Iseult, then back to Leonor. So you come to reclaim what was never yours? Leonor stepped forward. I come to speak aloud what you hoped would rot in silence. The negotiations were swift, brutal, and private. For 2 days, Leonor and Derosus sparred across a long table made of black ash wood. They spoke of vanished titles, forged signatures, and ancestral lands whose borders had shifted like sand under Derosus. Control. He denied nothing, but he ceded nothing. You have the hearts of the people, he said. But land is not love. It is stone. Leonor replied, and I will write the truth into the stone. On the 3rd day, Antonin asked to speak alone with the Lord. They talked behind closed doors for an hour. When they emerged, Derosus looked amused. He handed Leonor a scroll sealed in ash wax. Take it, he said. It is not surrender. It is theater. But theater moves men more than truth. What is it? She asked. A map. One I've kept hidden for decades. The parchment was old, but its lines were sure. It showed the original boundaries of House Merlin's estate. And this? She asked, pointing to a mark in the upper corner. Derosus smiled grimly. The Well of Thorns. Older than either of us. The Well of Thorns was no well at all, It was a sinkhole, half collapsed and covered in tangled vine, on the border between Derosus' land and what had once been Merlin territory. Local legend said it had no bottom, that screams fell into it and never came out, that the last daughter of Merlin long before, Iseult, had cast herself in after her children were taken. Is this where you buried them? Leonor asked quietly when they stood at its rim. Derosus said nothing. She dropped a stone into the dark dot. It never made a sound. When they returned to Evero, Leonor summoned the council. Before them, she unrolled the map. This land, she said, pointing to the old Merlin estate, will be returned. A ripple of shock. To whom? Asked a baron. To the line it was taken from. But the bloodline is ended, another said. Leonor looked at Iseult, who stepped forward. Not ended, she said. Just interrupted. The ceremony was held in the Cathedral of Names, a place once used to burn heretics, now restored as a place of record. Its walls were covered in names etched in brass and silver, from floor to spire. There, before witnesses, Leonor restored the title of Lady of Merlin to Iseult. The crowd did not cheer. They bowed. Slowly, reverently. As if the kingdom itself had exhaled. That night, Leonor climbed the eastern parapet alone. Antonin joined her, boots silent against the stone. You didn't tell me what you said to Derosus, she said. He looked up at the stars. I told him that you would win, even if he said no? Especially if he said no. She leaned on the rail. Sometimes I fear this is all too much, too fast. Antonin's voice was quiet. And sometimes I fear it's not fast enough. She turned to him. Will you stay? He met her gaze. Where else would I go? In the weeks that followed, the thorned concord grew. Other lords began to unseal their archives, not out of piety, but pressure. The people had found their tongues. Again, Cities passed laws restoring citizenship to the descendants of the condemned. A girl in Vervain found a deed to her family's bakery, burned during the White Tax riots, and was made its legal owner. Leonore began writing letters at dawn and didn't stop until the second bell of night. Each one began with the same words: "You were not forgotten." One morning, she received a package without seal or sender. Inside, a crown, not gold, not silver, but woven of dark wood, set with small white stones that glittered like frost. No note. Only a scrap of parchment bearing one word: soon. Antonin examined the crown but found no poison, no trap. Still, Leonore did not wear it. Not yet. The season turned. Autumn painted the leaves in fire and wine. Markets overflowed with grain, preserved meats, and crafts bearing the ivy symbol. Evero prepared for the festival of restitution, a new tradition born from an old wound. On the first night of the festival, the city gathered in the square beneath the Tower of Names. Bonfires roared, bread was broken, and one by one, children came forward to hang tokens from the memory tree. Leonore stood at the base of the tree, watching. A little girl approached, pale-eyed, clutching a broken compass. "It belonged to my brother," she whispered. "He was taken during the year of silence." Leonore knelt and helped her tie the compass to a low branch. Then the girl asked, "Will the tree remember him now?" Leonore nodded. Yes, and so will I. That night, in her chambers, she opened the pale book again. She added a new page. "To those who still search for the names they lost, I will keep the lantern lit." She signed it not with her full name. L. The festival had ended, but its afterglow lingered. For days, Evero smelled of spiced wine and embered bread. Lanterns remained strung across alleyways, flickering gently like stars caught in branches. Children still sang the ballads of the Tree of Memory, and newly returned nobles walked cautiously through the city, unsure how to carry themselves, now that power was no longer inherited, but witnessed. Leonore kept to the castle, not out of fear, but focus. The pale book now spanned 2 volumes, and both rested beside her morning plate of fruit and correspondence. She had begun meeting with a new order of scribes volunteers, mostly who had renamed themselves Les Ravaders, the Menders. Their job was to collect forgotten names, broken claims, and silenced bloodlines. "The weave is old," said one elderly woman, her fingers ink-stained and trembling, "but it was never finished. Let us thread it anew." Leonore allowed herself a rare smile, but the threads were pulling tighter. A report arrived one gray morning that broke the calm like shattered glass. Coastal town near the marshes of Mirande had burned. Nothing accidental fires set deliberately. Homes marked with the old royal sigil daubed in blood. Survivors spoke of masked riders. Wearing black dot, they left no demands. Only a warning carved into the town hall wall. Not all thrones are dead. Antonin read it aloud at council and said nothing after. He didn't need to. Leonore closed her eyes. "We need to ride there. But the festival has only just—" "I know what they want," she said, "and they will not take it." They rode. East within the hour. No heralds. No fanfare. Just Leonore Antonin, a detachment of 30, and a silence that grew heavier the closer they came to the ruins. Mirande had once been a quiet fishing town. Now it was a husk. Charred nets hung from blackened poles like mourning flags. The chapel had been torn stone from stone. Even the boats in the harbor had been set ablaze and left to sink into the surf. Leonore walked among the ashes and found the locket melted half shut. She did not open it. She buried it beneath a half-burned olive tree. Antonin stood beside her. "What do you think this is?" She answered, "An invitation." That night, a figure approached their camp. Cloaked, masked, slow of gait, he raised. No weapon, just a hand. The guard seized him, but he spoke calmly. "I come to speak to the widow." No one had called Leonore that in many months. Not in her presence, but she agreed to meet him alone. They brought him to her tent. She dismissed the guards. The man removed his mask. He was old, older than Derouse's. His face bore the marks of salt and wind, a sailor's tan, a prisoner's stare. He bowed not deeply. "You are Leonore of the Pale House," he said. "Widow of kings." "I am," she replied. "And you?" "A shadow," he said. "And a messenger." The man did not sit. He told a story, not unlike the ones Leonore had heard in the libraries beneath the abbey, of a court that had fled west, not when the war began, but when the war ended, knowing that the peace would never serve them. Called themselves Les Masques du Lys Noir, the Black Lily Mask, once nobles and pretenders, now ghosts. They passed between ports, forests, and border keeps, not hiding, waiting. Waiting for what? Leonore asked. "For the signal," said the old man. "And who gives it?" He smiled. "You." That night, Leonore did not sleep. She sat outside her tent, staring into the mist rising off the burnt stones of Mirande. Antonin found her at dawn. "You heard something," he said, sitting beside her. They were waiting for someone to challenge the court. Anyone. To make a hole in the wall. And now they think they can climb through it. She nodded. "They're not wrong. But they are late." Antonin was quiet for a moment. "Then let me find them." "You?" "I'll go alone, or with 2 others. I'll do what I did in the South Ride ahead. Get close. They'll kill you. Then make sure my name is written well." By week's end, Antonin had vanished into the western woods. He left no goodbye, only a note folded into her journal. "If fire begins, smother it in ink." She read it every night, and every morning. She wrote one more name into the pale book. Without Antonin, the days stretched longer. Word spread of raids on villages that had declared themselves autonomous. Market stalls overturned, letters of pardon burned in town squares. A cathedral was desecrated in Albel. A church bell thrown into the river, and always the same symbol, crudely drawn lilies. Blackened at the stem, the black lily mask was real, and they were growing bold. Leonore summoned Derouse's again. He arrived in silence and cloaked in gray. But his presence stirred the council chamber like a storm cloud. "I do not serve your crown," he reminded her. "You serve the land," she replied. "And it burns." He considered this. "What do you ask?" She showed him the latest map. 7 towns marked in ash. "I want you to send riders. Discreet. Skilled? To hunt Lily?" "No, to prune them." That night, Leonore visited. The memory tree, the compass still hung from its branch. Rusting gently in the damp air, she tied a ribbon beside it. Not red, not green, but deep violet. For morning, a week later, Antonin returned. Or rather, his horse did. Riderless, saddlebags empty, hooves blood-streaked. They found it outside Evero's western gate. Leonore said nothing when they brought it to her. She stroked its mane, fed it oats by hand, and gave orders to track Antonin's path 20 men. No banners. Then she returned to her chambers and sat at her writing desk. She opened the pale book and added a single line, "To those who vanish. Without echo, we will make the silence speak." 3 days later, a parchment arrived, no seal. No sender. Inside, a drawing, it showed Antonin alive, bound, bruised, but standing. Below it, written in fluid hand, "Come alone, widow." The council forbade it, her advisers begged. The menders warned of assassination. Even Darausis, in his sardonic way, cautioned her. "They think you foolish enough to walk into a snare." "They're wrong," Leonore said. "You'll go." Anyway, she didn't answer. But she wore black that night, not from mourning, from memory, at dawn. She rode out alone, no escort. No fanfare, just a single blade, the pale book in her satchel, and the thorned crown tucked beneath her cloak. The meeting place was a ruined observatory near the cliffs of Valais, an old place. Once used to chart stars, long abandoned after the fall of the 3 houses. She reached it by noon. Inside, masked figures waited. 7 in total. And one of them stepped forward, removing his mask. Antonin. Alive. But something in his eyes had changed. "I told them you would come," he said softly. "They said they'd kill you if I didn't," she replied. One of the masked ones spoke, a woman's voice, rough and sharp. "You carry no guards." "I carry the truth." "Then speak it," said the woman. Leonore stepped forward, pulled the pale book from her satchel, and opened it. She did not read names. She read stories. A weaver's daughter jailed for stealing bread after her village burned in the war. A mason executed for hiding wounded children during a purge. A boy who wrote poems by candlelight and was lashed for sedition. Before he was 12. She read until her voice cracked. She read until the masked ones shifted uncomfortably. And then she said, "You wear masks to hide your faces. I have spent my life uncovering them." One by one, the masked figures removed their disguises. Not nobles, not exiles. Just people. Hurt people. Angry people. Forgotten people. And she looked at each of them and said, "I do not ask for your loyalty. I ask for your testimony." By nightfall, the observatory had become a council. Antonin sat beside her, silent but present. The masked ones now, unmasked, shared stories of injustice not in the books, wounds not in the records. Leonore listened. And when the moon rose, she opened the pale book again. She added a new page. Then she took out the crown of darkwood and placed it gently in the center of the room. "For all of us," she said. The woman who had first spoken stepped forward. "Who are you to claim us?" "I claim nothing," said Leonore. "I only remember." It began with a fire, not from the black lily mask, but from within Evero itself. A bakery near the river quarter went up in flames in the middle of the night. Then the tannery. Then the southern gate stables. By morning, the air was black with smoke, and the sky over the castle was a dim copper hue. Leonore stood at her balcony and watched Evero burn. It was not an invasion. It was a warning. In the ruined observatory. Days earlier, she had struck a fragile accord with the remnants of the mask. Not allegiance, not submission, but a promise that every name forgotten by the old crown would be inscribed. Every injustice laid bare. In return, the masks would come off. The hidden blades would lower. Not all had agreed. Some had left in the night, masked still, slipping away like foxes into fog. Among them, the woman who had spoken first. Now Leonore feared she knew where that woman had gone. Antonin paced the chamber like a man unsure of which limb still obeyed him. They want to make you choose between Evero and the Pale Book, he said, between peace and memory. I won't choose, Leonore replied. They are the same thing. He stopped. Then they'll burn both. The fires were doused by the next day. No lives lost, but damage done. Trade routes closed. Food stores depleted. Whispers in the marketplace. Had the widow lost control? Was the court fracturing again? Leonore gathered the menders in the Hall of Echoes. We do not silence fire with silence, she said. We answer it. How? Asked a young girl, with ink on her cheek. With more books? No, Leonore said. With stories that breathe. A proclamation went out from the Pale Throne. A public forum would be held in Evero Square in 3 days. Not a festival, not a court, a reckoning. Word spread quickly. By the first morning, hundreds had gathered, commoners, merchants, former nobles, wandering monks, and hooded strangers with calloused hands. They sat side by side, facing a makeshift platform draped not in banners, but in cloths bearing hand-painted symbols. A quill, a torch, a broken chain. Leonore stood before them with the Pale Book in hand, but she did not read from it. Instead, she called for voices from the crowd. First came a boy no older than 12, who spoke of how his father had been taken by the old tax guards for hiding grain, then a woman who had been branded a traitor for marrying across houses, then an old man who remembered the capital's fall not with glee or hatred, but confusion. He had been a clerk. One day the building emptied. The next, soldiers came. I never knew why, he said, until now. One by one, the people spoke. And one by one, scribes wrote. Not all who listened believed. Some scoffed, some wept, but none. Left. In the back of the crowd, Leonore spotted a figure in a violet cloak, the same shade as the ribbon she had tied to the memory tree, the woman from the observatory. She met Leonore's gaze and vanished into the crowd. That night, Antonin brought news. Another town doll had declared secession. Not from Leonore's reign, but from all rule. They say they will not be governed by anyone who has ever worn a crown. He said, They're not wrong to be afraid, she murmured, but they are wrong to fight alone. She wrote a letter to Thal that night, handwritten, no seal. She told them they had every right to declare themselves free, but that the Pale Book was theirs too. And if they would write their names in it, then they were not alone. She sent it with a single rider, unarmed. It was a gamble. It returned unsigned, but not unopened. A month later, Thal sent 3 delegates to Evero. They asked for parchment and ink. Their rouses returned soon after. I've been to the northern passes, he said. They whisper of a new claimant. To what? The old throne. Leonore leaned back in her chair. That throne is ash. Their rouses nodded, but people still dream of sitting on it. She looked at the Pale Book. Then let's show them a better dream. A plan began to take shape. Not an army, not a doctrine, a caravan. It was Antonin's idea. If the mask spreads through fear, he said, Then we must spread something stronger. Faith? Asked Leonore. No, witness. Within a fortnight, a great wagon was built, reinforced with lacquered wood and iron wheels. On its sides were carved the sigils of every town that had added its names to the pale book. A topic, a tall canopy of woven silk, and within hundreds of blank pages would travel from village to village. Moving archive but also a beacon they called it the Ashen Road, a name reclaimed from fear. Leonore herself rode at the front for the first journey, Antonin beside her, sword at his hip. The route wound through the southern ridges, through places that had only heard of the widow through rumor or rebel song in each town. The ritual was the same, a gathering, a reading, and a chance to write. Some wrote their names with pride, others with trembling hands. Some wrote the names of the dead, and some refused, but none were turned away. One evening, in the village of Dornay, a masked figure appeared, black cloak, lily brooch. He did not speak. He simply approached the caravan's open book, stared at it for a long time, then scrawled a single word, Benut, and vanished. That night, Leonore asked Antonin who Benut had been. He answered quietly, my brother. The caravan grew by the 5th village. It was 3 wagons by the 9th 7. Scribes from Evero joined the route. So did bakers, healers, even musicians. Children followed, mimicking the motions of writing in the air. Some towns offered food. Some offered stories. Others offered old ledgers, once hidden. And from these, the pale book grew in the 12th village. The woman in the violet cloak returned. She did not approach Leonore. Instead, she climbed a barrel and spoke to the crowd. We once believed silence kept us safe. It didn't. She held up a mask and dropped it to the ground. I was a sword in the dark. Now I would rather be a name on a page. Then she walked to the pale book and signed, Sabine Elais, daughter of no house, survivor of the tower siege. Leonore wept when she read it. Not from sorrow, not from recognition. They reached the coast on the 40th day. A storm was rising, but the people came anyway. They gathered on the cliffs, hundreds of them, watching as the final volume was set on a stone pedestal overlooking the sea. Leonore climbed beside it. No crown, no sword, just ink-stained fingers. She read aloud, not from memory, but from hope. In a land once ruled by thrones of fire, may we now be ruled by flame that warms not. Urns, let no voice be unwritten. Let no silence go unmarked. The crowd did not cheer. They stood in reverent quiet. Even the wind seemed hushed. The ashen road had done what no banner could. It had given the land back its voice, not in unison, but in chorus. That night, as the caravan prepared to return to Evero, Antonin asked, do you think it will last? Leonore looked at the great, heavy books now tied with leather and protected in cedar. No, she said, nothing does. Then she smiled, but it will echo.